I want to shift topics a little bit here and talk about what's happening in Belarus, specifically that Russia is absorbing Belarus, maybe like a big octopus, kind of just grabbing and swallowing it up. So there's a report from the Institute for the Study of War released. They released an in-depth 100-page report explaining that Russia's process to annex Belarus. I'm going to quote from the report, and then we'll get into it a little bit. So, from the report, Russia's effort to de facto annex Belarus, while incomplete, is in a very advanced stage and has already achieved milestones that pose security threats to the United States, NATO, and Ukraine, and an existential threat to Belarus's continued existence as a sovereign state. Russia does not need to make any additional integration gains in Belarus to threaten the West. Russia's existing suite of military, political, and economic integration gains in Belarus since 2020 already pose threats to the West that policymakers must consider. All right, Cody, what is going on in Belarus that we don't know? Give us a little primer and some of the takeaways from the report that you've read.
So the report's free, by the way. You can go to the Institute for the Study of War. Incredible resource to anybody who's interested that's about geopolitics. And this report, it's a huge report. So if you are not like me and don't like going through 100-page reports about this stuff, I'll give you the summary, which is Belarus is more or less just a state of Russia. And most people have known this for a long time, but the report really dives into specifically what's happening. Like, it's one thing to say that Belarus is a state of Russia, and that's another thing to actually outline what's going on. So I'm going to...
Well, before we do that, like, why does Belarus even matter?
So Belarus is very strategically aligned. If we should throw a map picture up just so
we'll put a map up.
Okay. So it borders Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, and Ukraine. And of course, Russia. So it's kind of another country similar to Ukraine, having
smaller.
But in terms of the buffer zone within NATO versus, or compared to Russia, it was more or less a buffer country. But the reality is that it's Russia, and Russia's ability to put influence on its bordering states on the NATO alliance is more than ever, and we saw this by what was going on in Ukraine, which was Russia was operating in Belarus to move equipment and to cross the border into Ukraine. So why does this matter? It's just another one of those things that Russia is doing behind the scenes and no one's paying attention to, because we're focused on the US election, we're focused on the economy, we're focused on cryptocurrencies, we're focused on everything. And Russia is just slowly, patiently spreading its influence. And Belarus, I would say, after reading this report, I'll go through the bullet points in just a second. After reading this report, I'm like, this is just a state of Russia. I mean, this is Russia now. And people should know this. People should understand what's going on here.
What is the, so this report outlines a bunch of stuff, right? It talks a little bit about like economic control, military integration, cultural and information influence that Russia has in Belarus, their strategic advantage against NATO in the West. What is the most concerning part to you about Russia and Belarus working together and effectively, the takeover that Russia has done in Belarus?
I think the best way to explain this would be if you have, let's say, two militaries from two different countries and they all of a sudden had to work together. There's many countries that just would not work, meaning you have different equipment, you have a different language, you have different command structure, you have different strategies, different tactics, etc. If you look at the US, we are very well aligned with the UK, Australia, even France and other NATO countries.
Canada.
Exactly, Canada. And we even provide US manufactured weapons, equipment, jets, etc. for them. So we literally are working under the same equipment. You could say that that's exactly what Russia is doing with Belarus. And if you're a Russian, you're probably saying, well, America does the same thing. And we do the same thing. The difference is that what is going on in Belarus is that Russia is also taking over its government parts as well. So when you look at who's being put into certain office, when you look at how elections are being run, when you look at the legal system of Belarus, when you look at almost everything having to do with Belarus society, economy, and war capability, it's completely intergrained with Russia now. even with manufacturing of actual equipment and supplies of labor, technology, and raw resources. And so let me just go down this.
It's like a member of the Soviet Union.
Yeah, it is. It's a state of Russia. So the bullet points are military integration, as you mentioned, and this includes deploying Russian military personnel and positioning Russian nuclear weapons in Belarus. I don't think that's a surprise to anybody, but the report very clearly articulates it. The second thing is political union, and this involves discussions on a Russian-Belarusian union state with shared political structures, which would significantly reduce Belarus's sovereignty. We already knew this. Economic control, and this would mean that economic policies and resources in Belarus would increasingly be controlled by Moscow. Again, no surprise, but this is just happening more and more. So this list is long, and I won't go down all of it.
The one that I think is interesting is that there's been moves to harmonize their legal systems to push in Russian laws and have Russian laws apply in Belarus. That's very interesting.
Yeah, and again, this support's huge. You can look at it for yourself, but that's exactly what I'm getting at in terms of it just being blended all together. And you can make an
argument for the people that talk about how, if we don't stop Russia and Ukraine, that they're going to continue to push west.
100%. And that's basically what this report is saying. It's a very high view of what's happening with Russia and the Russian Empire, I'll say, because the same thing is happening in Georgia. The same thing is happening in really the entire region around Georgia with this Russian influence. The same things happen in a lot of African nations, which is this influence of Russia in other parts of the world that may seem not super important to a Western country, but if you play it out 10 years from now, it could be disastrous for the US or for other Western countries because we're going to get cut off from certain resources or certain relationships. And this report articulates exactly how Belarus has basically fallen. Belarus, you write it off. That's part of Russia now. And if we don't pay attention to what's going on, there's going to be more and more countries. And if I was Lithuania or Latvia right now, which border Belarus, and are former Soviet, or formerly part of the USSR, I would be super concerned. I would be very, very, very concerned about what's happening next. In the US, we're very lucky to be isolated from a lot of these issues. But if we really are going to align ourselves with these countries that are concerned about being taken over by Russia, like this is a real thing we have to address now. Are we going to back these countries up or are we not? Like what's going to happen here? Because Russia is moving forward with doing this.
Well, and it's also it's a better way to take over than through military force, right? It's in a sense, it's running the same playbook we've run, where you infiltrate, try to put in a political leader who is sympathetic to the views of the United States, right? We've done this all over, where you find somebody, you back them internally, and then you turn over the government, and now boom, the government is now goes from being anti-Russian to pro-Russian. Not that Belarus was like anti-Russian. I think they're very Russian. But
well, that's what happened in Ukraine in 2014.
Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, that sort of thing.
There was a Russian aligned president in Ukraine. There was the Orange Revolution in 2014 that the U.S. clearly backed, and we put in a pro-West president. And then Russia was like, screw that. And we know what happened there. But that's, I guess, pointing to Belarus, what could happen there or in these other Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia region. So we'll see what happens there. But I think
are you investing in Belarus?
I think like 10 years ago, my adventure side of investing was like, this is an opportunity. Everyone's like, thinks this is overblown. But now that I'm like much more, I guess, experienced and have had my teeth kicked in on many experiences like this, I'm like, I ain't touching this. I am not getting involved in anything around here. This is the surest way to move money or lose money.
Yeah.